Today, I'm asking the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the CIA to investigate how and why such crucial information was hidden, to fire those involved in the cover-up, and to file criminal charges, if appropriate, against these people. Yet concealing China's meddling was only the beginning.
All right, well, tonight Trump, as you probably know, made his big address on election integrity, and I want to run you through some of those details as well as the recent moves made today by DHS and certain federal agencies, because to make a long story short, all of our little conspiracy theories from 2020 have been completely vindicated. For example, as just one, we do indeed now know that there are millions of non-citizens on the voter rolls in this country, but it doesn't stop there. We also have learned it is indeed true that foreign adversaries are actively interfering in our elections, and we don't mean that in a stupid Russians bought some Facebook post kind of way. We mean actually state-coordinated attempts to access the voter data of hundreds of millions of Americans coming from nations like China type of way. We further know, and this was one of my favorite findings of tonight, that indeed voting machines are not secure. That is not a claim being made by me or some unfounded source. That is actually the claim made by the CIA themselves, which is hilarious. Because if you remember what happened back in 2020, if you tried to say this or question the voting machines, you were not just shut down as a cuckoo conspiracy theorist, but rather labeled as someone that was actively dangerous. You're a domestic terrorist insurrectionist threatening American democracy. Many people were, of course, banned from social media platforms, including the one we're broadcasting on right now at the time, for questioning this. And yet apparently what was going on behind the scenes is that the CIA was 100% well aware, the deep state, and is this exactly surprising? Yeah, voting machines are being used to steal elections. We're kind of observing that happen all around the world. And by the way, not only that, but amidst the 2020 election investigations that took place between the periods of November and January of 2021, the CIA agents were actually engaging in a cover-up of this information from the Trump administration and President Trump. So basically, you had like a second silent coup that went on. It wasn't just what took place on election day. We had the same stuff going on even after the fact. They were hiding known information of election machines being hackable and insecure from the president while they were questioning and trying to audit the election. It's insane. But of course, it kind of almost vindicates the biggest conspiracies or theories that surround the 2020 election. Am I right? But let's not forget, most secure election in U.S. history, by the way, right? Never lose sight of just how ridiculous that whole circus act was. And by the way, why did CNN and these characters often go out and say that? Well, they cited intelligence officials, the sources, the experts who we now know, according to declassified government information, were like actively engaged in a cover-up and they knew the election was not secure, right? But of course, it was more than just left-wing NGOs that tried to, quote-unquote, borrow the 2020 election. But speaking of those very left-wing NGOs, we also know as well, remember, and maybe the thing we've pushed the most is this idea that, yes, there are actually leftist groups that are ballot harvesting, often doing so illegally, and it has a big influence on elections. Well, that was actually busted by authorities in 2020. And guess what also took place, ladies and gentlemen? A cover-up of that information as well. So basically, right, we're not just proving that this stuff did go down in 2020. That was not a secure election. It was objectively very compromised at the very least. That is a conservative assessment of what you could say about it. But furthermore, there was basically a deep state coup to hide all of this stuff, and now only in the second Trump term do we even have access to this information, or can we prove that this type of stuff is going on? It's utterly insane, but let's talk about all of it. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is the best way to support our work, and it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, I want to begin with some information that predates the Trump speech, but this was announced earlier today. You can see here, DHS has just informed election officials that there might be over 256,000 non-citizens registered to vote in just 4 generally blue states. You can see here they're estimating California may have around 190,832 non-citizens on the voter rolls. Really shouldn't surprise you, especially in a state like California, where we've pointed out many times, especially around the Spencer Pratt election. But as someone who also grew up there, I know what this is like. The election system there is a complete joke, okay? You know, you do this mass mail-in ballot thing. They don't purge voter rolls. They don't update voter rolls. All these people who have moved, they're still getting ballots at the old address, all of that. And considering, by the way, the voter ID laws in that state are so insane, you can use things like, for example, a gym membership to confirm voter ID to register when you go to vote. Election officials are banned from asking for voter ID, you know, just completely insane stuff. But now, big conspiracy theory here, right? 190,000, it's estimated, people in California, non-citizens on the voter rolls that are notoriously they're not purged, but it doesn't stop. Pennsylvania, around 14,576, New Jersey, 35,152, and Nevada, 15,903. Now, you may sit there and ask, well, why is it estimated? Why is this something that they can't confirm? Why is it not exact data? Well, that is because, by the way, to back up another conspiracy theory here, you may remember this was sort of a minor headline from last year, but very relevant now in retrospect, that does anyone recall when the Trump administration, especially under Doge and those things, asked for Democrat states, in all states, but especially Democrat states, to submit their voter rolls to the federal government for inspection? And remember that California and all these blue states refuse to do so. They won't turn over their voter rolls, which is, of course, hilarious because they keep talking about secure elections. Voter fraud doesn't happen. There's no cover up. All these right wingers are completely crazy for making these types of suggestions or accusations. And then when we simply ask, okay, you say illegal aliens are not voting, can we see the voter rolls? California, literally like the kid behind the candy jar or something, is like, no, there's nothing there, right? But that is, by the way, why this is estimated, because basically DHS has gone through them and is trying to, you know, point out, hey, we believe this person is a non-citizen, but they need California also to hand over the data so that it can be cross-referenced and cross-examined. So just understand, that's why it's an estimate. Is literally because California is refusing to allow DHS to confirm if that person is actually non-citizen using state data. So that's where the estimate comes from. But yeah, just utterly insane and ridiculous. But again, who's been trying to say this? That this is absolutely happening. So there you have that. How do you have that many non-citizens registered to vote? By the way, we were reliably informed that, hey, you know, voter fraud gets caught, guys, and it barely happens. And if someone is on the voter rolls as a non-citizen, you know, they're going to get found out. We're going to kick them off. Of course, that's not happening. California doesn't check their voter rolls for blank, and not much of a surprise. But then, of course, we get into Trump's speech itself. And before he got into anything talking about election integrity, he actually began by, you know, speaking about the economy, some of his current political accomplishments, immigration, by the way, reminding and basically speaking, right, about the everyday issues that Americans care about, but also reminding people of how bad things were just 2 years ago under the Biden administration, which is, of course, something I think that he needs to bring up every time he has a national stage, and we ought not forget, because there are many characters out there with short memories as we currently speak, not understanding the significance of this presidency or even how important it is that we're now in power where we can even find this information out. This would have been buried to history had we lost the election. And yet, as usual, there are so many characters saying, this is no different from a Democrat administration. Oh, you mean finding out that, like, the CIA basically kind of, you could argue, stole the election in 2020, right? No, Joe Biden would have done this, guys, clearly, right? I mean, just what an absolute joke. But anyways, getting into the election claims, we first of all do have the confirmation from our own intelligence agencies, which, let's not forget, just about up until 2 seconds ago, mainstream media told us to cite as gospel. How, remember back in the first Trump administration, for example, they used to get really pissed off that Trump is asking any doubting questions. He's not he's not believing what our intelligence agencies say to him about literally every single thing. So let's remember that. It's heresy to question our intelligence agencies. Okay, therefore, what do we first of all know? According to declassified government information, that China especially heavily compromised the 2024 election. In fact, being able to access the election data of around 220 million voter files, which you would think for the people who are so obsessed allegedly about foreign interference in our elections, right? Russia this, Russia that. Again, what is like the core claim around Russia, that the Russians bought some Facebook ads or something, like completely menial, had no impact on anything? Okay, so you would think what China did in 2020 ought to be like a big deal, right? Isn't that something that, is Chinese collusion? By the way, did the Biden administration, or the Biden campaign, I should say, collude with the Chinese government? Is it even that much of a coincidence that the whole pandemic that, started basically the fortification and the borrowing of the 2020 election, as they like to call it, came from China, right? But of course, the explanation to that is not much of a mystery, and it wasn't just the fact that the media was biased or hated Trump. Apparently, the Chinese government was also seeking to actively bribe the media to be more anti-Trump. No, I'm not making that up. Like, this is actually insane, right? Again, a lot more than some Facebook ads we're talking about here. And by the way, you wonder why this information has not come out until now, as we hinted in our introduction, because there literally was an actual deep state cover-up of this, right? We had officials, for example, within the FBI admitting in their own words to running a shadow government to hide this intel about, hey, basically what's going on in 2020, right? The FBI, CIA, NSA, all of these agencies, they know China is meddling with our election, but they actively and intentionally hid it from President Trump at the time. Right? They refused to even include this information in Trump's presidential briefings, basically, because they didn't want the actual proof of, for example, stuff going on our elections to come to light. So take a listen to these details. Utterly, completely insane.
The Chinese government sought to identify U.S. journalists who had reported negatively on the U.S. president and pay them large sums of money to write more negative articles about him, as many as they could, and they didn't care what they said. The Chinese government wanted U.S. president to lose the next election, and the reason they wanted me to lose is because they knew I was wise to them, charged them billions and billions of dollars worth of tariffs, and built the strongest military anywhere in the world. We have the strongest military anywhere in the world. These are exact quotes from the CIA reporting. The name of the person doing the quote is now under review, but it gets even worse. Raw intelligence obtained by the FBI in 2020, yet buried by rogue bureaucrats, stated that China's activities even included an attempt to manufacture illegal ballots for Joe Biden. Documents show that during this period, dozens of significant CIA and NSA reports about China's election targeting were kept out of the presidential briefing. These were briefings I would get almost every day. Everything was kept out that was of importance. One email among intelligence analysts admitted that they had, quote, deliberately massaged the presidential daily briefing to withhold information regarding Chinese activities related to the election. Another official inside the FBI wrote that she was running, quote, a shadow government, unquote, to keep intelligence about China's election meddling from becoming known and to keep it away from the honorable press.
Yeah, so not only was China meddling in our election up until the point of even trying to submit illegal ballots, but maybe the more damning story than that, because hey, foreign countries interfere in other countries' elections. That happens everywhere around the world. Fine, fair enough. Isn't the more bombshell piece the fact that our own intelligence agencies knew this was happening and tried to cover up information about it? Not just in terms of not telling the press, not even telling the president of the United States who they serve, hey, this foreign adversary is like trying to steal our election. No, we're just not going to speak about that, right? Almost makes you have to wonder, frankly, whether there were collusion attempts going on between the deep state and the Chinese government, which was also strongly hinted at tonight. But of course, you may be asking the question, isn't that like highly seditious or treasonous behavior? Shouldn't that be a serious crime against the United States? To which, yes, it is. It ought to be, right? And again, just think about the conspiracies here that are being proven. Literally, it wasn't just an issue of like, oh, maybe certain systems in 2020 were insecure, although they were. No, the deep state literally covered up the fact that certain entities were trying to steal the election, right? And then how pathetic and ridiculous was this whole ritual for the past several years? The experts and intelligence officials are telling CNN that this was the most secure election in US history. Now we've just declassified what those intelligence officials are saying behind the scenes. You know, it's like, oh, of course, right? They knew it was not the most secure election in US history. They were just trying to cover that up. But then when we try to point out things that even intuition at the time could suggest did seem to be happening. I mean, when you think back to the 2020 fever dream, nothing was right about that entire year. And we were the normal people trying to call out things that were so utterly and obviously crazy. But there was this whole hive mind to just shut us down and say, no, that's not true. These are election deniers. These are just domestic terrorists. They're utterly insane. They're QAnon. They're this or that. And yeah, newsflash, like many other things, like the Twitter files exposed, like, certain stuff on COVID, even the border crisis. Let's remember that was largely exposed because Elon Musk bought X and people were able to now see the videos. Oh, what do you know? The crazy right wingers are like, not spreading conspiracy theories. We're pointing out things that are actually happening, and you're just shutting them down. You're covering them up and then calling them a conspiracy theory, right? It's not even that, oh, the evidence does not exist. You guys are making it up. No, you guys are just covering it up when we present the evidence. Like, that's what's going on here, right? So really, the correct term is not actually a conspiracy theory, but you get the point. It goes on here, though, by the way. Trump then transitioned to talk about voting machines. Now, this is another thing that is just like denial of reality that we're getting from the institutions, because let's not forget pre-2020, it was sort of a known fact that voting machines had problems. Like, this was not something just invented with Trump or whatever. The Bernie campaign was talking about voting machines back in 2016, if you remember. But more importantly, the fact that voting machines in countries like Venezuela, historically around the world, yes, have been used to cheat, to hack, to manufacture fake results and ultimately steal elections. But once again, who knew that to be the case back in 2020 when, of course, we were shut down and censored and called conspiracy theorists for questioning the integrity of voting machines? Trump further revealed tonight the CIA also, talk about another cover-up, right? Knew this to be true around voting machines. In fact, they were studying and even proving how it happened in Venezuela, further even confirming that the voting machine stuff is so elaborate, the way in which it can be manipulated, that it can't even be detected via an audit. So let's remember the audits of the 2020 elections, and people tried to say, oh, well, the audit showed that, this was the result, so that's it, Literally, the CIA actually said, hey, certain bad actors out there have a method to even get around detection by an audit of the elections, right? Voting machines can be that easily manipulated and they're that advanced. We shouldn't be using them. We should be counting by hand, obviously. Oh, there you go. Just another crazy right-wing conspiracy theory, right? Indeed, our own government does not think voting machines are secure, yet we're using the voting machines, yet we're told it's the most, like think about the cognitive dissonance here. The intelligence agencies fed to the mainstream media most secure election in U.S. history, where voting machines as one thing, among others, right? Mail-in votes and all that, right? But voting machines were widely employed across many different states, if you remember. And our government literally rules. Voting machines are not secure, but then tells us and then calls us crazy for denying most secure election in U.S. history. Oh, yeah, just another piece of information to point out there. And then, of course, let's not forget about the left-wing NGO impact on all of this, especially when it comes to Spencer Pratt and talking about that whole situation over in Los Angeles. We've also pointed out, this is a thing that happens. Left-wing NGOs go around and ballot harvest, and that's, for example, besides the fact that you can just straight up potentially commit fraud, the reason why, for example, Democrats support things like universal mail-in voting and no voter ID and all of that is because the laws makes it just significantly easier for them to go and ballot harvest. Although in many different cases, the so-called ballot harvesting that is taking place is not actually legal. And for example, back in Michigan, an important swing state, let's not forget, for 2020, Trump revealed tonight something that happened where a Democrat get out the vote ballot harvesting organization was, guess what? Listen to this. Raided by state police off of the allegation that upon investigation that they were basically faking voter registrations, right? Like signing up people to vote, to register to vote that did not exist. It was so bad that Michigan State Police submitted it to the FBI. By the way, let's not forget at the time, what are we being told publicly by the media? Voter fraud is not happening. This is not happening. And it's incredibly low rates, most secure election, right? Continuing here with this kind of story of how the deep state literally stole the 2020 election, right? You know what the FBI did with the information? They covered it up and then ultimately slow rolled and under the Biden administration ultimately killed and dropped the investigation. So you're noticing a common pattern here, right? Where we're not just learning that, again, the things we believe to be are true, such as voter rolls having illegals, China interfering on behalf of Democrats, voting machines not being secure, left-wing NGOs, that industrial complex like you just saw in Los Angeles, ballot harvesting and often breaking laws to ballot harvest. But every single time, what's the common denominator here, right? It was covered up by the CIA or the FBI or the deep state, right? Every single time. Our intelligence officials knew this stuff was happening. They had the information. They deliberately admitted to withholding it from Trump during all of that, right? Assuming, oh, he's never going to come back into office. We're never going to find this out because surely after we win in 2020 and, throw Trump in jail, they're never going to be able to come into power and access this information. And guess what is indeed happening? We indeed did come into power and access this information, which is why I thank God every day that we won the 2024 election, regardless of these detractors. But it's also a useful reminder, that Doge has been significant and there's a lot of cleaning house that's been done at the federal government. But let's also not forget that these sort of like treasonous, seditious actors actually, conspiracy theory number one proven correct. They do exist in our government, right? These are not just a bunch of benevolent, neutral, non-political bureaucrats that we're talking about, but that secondly, maybe obviously need to be removed there. But also thirdly, maybe another point I'd like to make about this is, while this is of course all true, right? There's a deep state plot literally to like manipulate and borrow, quote unquote, the 2020 election. But why is it relevant today? Because of course people will ask those questions. Well, let's not forget that this is a time where we are once again calling to pass the Save America Act. And you wonder why that is actually a national emergency. You wonder why that's so important, ladies and gentlemen. It's because of everything that was revealed just now. It's because of the election we just watched, for example, take place in Los Angeles. And yet another reminder to Senate Republicans, if there was any time, if there was ever any mandate to actually like step up and do your job and get this done, it would be right now. I mean, after all, a lot of conservative channels recently covered how Joe Rogan is now, for example, awake to this like election integrity issue because he saw what happened in Los Angeles and he might have not believed 2020, But Spencer Pratt, what happened there? It was very transparent in front of his face. He's like, yeah, this is not right. We have pointed out, ladies and gentlemen, that is a thing happening with a bunch of normies at the moment, right? Although we may have been called crazy by them back then, there are a lot of people now, especially because of what just happened in LA, kind of coming around to this idea. I don't think our elections are very secure. So you have actually like the most popular support, I would argue, you're ever going to have currently on the election integrity issue, but you back that up with like a bombshell, frankly, Watergate tier story. Okay, this is a massive political scandal. This is not something minor that's like swept under the rug. No, that the deep state literally tried to steal the 2020 election from Trump, and here's all the ways in which it happened, right? That Republicans, what do you mean you can't pass the Save America Act? What do you mean it's not important enough to you? You're not going to pursue it through reconciliation. Oh, the filibuster, it's not worth it. It's not that important. Have you heard what just happened tonight? So yet another reminder, this is why we need to pass the Save America Act. And further, this is why certain seditious actors need to be thrown in jail, and certain media organizations, social media companies, and a lot of different entities that tried to censor this information years ago and engage in that active cover-up, that active Chinese cover-up, we should add, ought to be held accountable in their own ways. But anyways, there you have it for now, guys. Let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.